Hello, Michael here, by myself for something a little bit different for the podcast. As you know, we've been covering Survivor South Africa, and we've just wrapped up our coverage on Immunity Island. Not Island of Secrets, Immunity Island. And we're moving on to Return of the Outcasts. As I said with Immunity Island, I hadn't seen that season. It's the only season I went in unspoiled completely on. And Return of the Outcasts I've also not seen, but I do know that Dino wins. But with it being the first big high-profile returnee season for Survivor South Africa, I thought I'd go over the castmates that I'd like to see back, and of the ones that I already know are back, how I think they'll play a second time. So just for something different, I thought it would be fun to discuss this before I watch the season. Obviously, when we record the podcast, I've already seen it all, so it's all said with hindsight. So I thought I'd do this before I start watching it. So from Survivor Philippines, I know 5 that are back, and I think that'll probably be the only 5. I'll say who else I would have liked to have seen from that season, because I do know that this season isn't solely based from the 3 seasons that we've watched. It also brings back players from the previous era of Survivor South Africa, which I've not watched. So from this season, Seamus is coming back, which is, the Francesca of Survivor South Africa, being the first boot. Hopefully he doesn't follow in her footsteps again. I think Seamus is a really interesting one to come back because he's someone that went because he played really hard. And I think of all the first boots that you could bring back, Seamus is definitely one I'd like to see play again. He's not someone who went out just because he sucked. I think he actually had some game sense about him. He just went way too hard, way too soon, and was blindsided at the airlock. So I'm excited to see Seamus back. I think if you're going to cast the first boot, definitely Seamus is the one. And then the big 3 that I know from this season that are kind of entwined together is, by tattoos of all things, is Tevin, PK, and Tony. So that whole trio and their tattoos I know about. And I think all 3 of them definitely deserve their place on an All-Star season. I think of a pre-merge boot, Tevin is the standout of that season, with the exception of Martinez, obviously. And I think Tevin is one of those players that he's someone that he didn't get particularly far in the game, but has a big threat level, which is kind of unfair on him. He's not someone that made it super deep that you should be really worried about, but I think people see him as a strategic threat. And it'll be interesting to see how him and PK are together in a season together again, especially with PK betraying that brotherhood and sending him home, and Tony too. And I think, having spoke to Tony on the podcast, I do have a bit of spoilerish stuff from the interview we did with her regarding her and Palessa and kind of her place and all that stuff. So that's unavoidable. So I think we've covered that on the interview that we did with Tony, which you can check out on the Tribe of Nerds podcast. Palessa is the other one that I know from this season, which is a very interesting one because she's the accidental idol hound. She just kept stumbling upon these things and then sadly went home with it in terrible fashion in a position where she absolutely should have played. I'd never be so stupid to not play an idol when I should. That's an org reference. I'm not just being mean to Palessa. I'm excited to see Palessa back because I think she's a very good social player, and I think she stands a very good chance of doing well, kind of like in that Shawnee position of where she can level the playing field in terms of being a big threat just by being good socially. And I think Palessa stands a good chance. It's difficult to discuss too much when you know that Dino doesn't eventually wins it, But I think Palessa is definitely someone that stands a good chance of making it deep into the game again. And then who else would I like to see from Philippines if I had it my way? Honestly, he's a mess, but bring Martinez back. We discussed with Rebel Kel from Survivor Australia and Tanya from Return of the Island of the Idols. These South African season names just confuse me. They're too similar. That kind of not great gameplay, but super entertaining player, and I think Martinez would be a really fun player to come back for an All-Star season. Maybe, he brought his final tribal speech the first time he played, so maybe he could bring something else for this one, like, I don't know what he would do, but I'd like to see him back. Shanae, we interviewed her. Sadly, I know she doesn't come back, but I'd love to see Shanae because she's fantastic. And Werner is like the obvious one that I think everyone would have wanted to see back from that season, and sadly isn't on it. I think it was Tony in our interview that made a good point that the season is called Return of the Outcasts, and Werner wasn't really an outcast. He dominated the season, so that's a fair reason not to have him in. But if that's the case, just call it All Stars and bring back one of your most popular players of all time. Werner would have been fantastic, I'm sure. And another one I'd really have liked to have seen is Katinka. I think Katinka was someone who really grew on me across the season. I didn't think she was much of a strategic player or much of a player at all for the first kind of third or half of the game, and then she really grew into someone who had a good grasp on the game, and I think had a really good chance of winning. And I think Katinka would be someone that's really interesting to come in as a second-time player, and I think she would have been really good, but unfortunately she didn't make the cut. Next, we move on to Island of Secrets. During our Island of Secrets recap, we discussed the 5 that came back on that podcast, and I was blown away when I learned that Felix is coming back. Felix is such an interesting one, because I don't know why he's back. I don't think he really did anything in that season to warrant a place. All he ever talked about was wanting to get out of Tribal Council. He just didn't really want to discuss the game. He wanted to just get back to camp and live his little merry life. So he's an odd choice for an All-Star season, and I don't think Felix will do well. He seemed very quick to anger, and especially as someone who wasn't super into the game talk all the time on an All-Star season where gameplay is going to be heavily discussed, I think Felix is like a square peg in a round hole kind of thing. And then I get to the one I'm most excited about seeing return. Probably in the entire cast, the person I'm most excited to see play again is Tanya. Tanya is the wild card pick of the season, and like I said with Rebel Kell, absolutely someone that should come back on a season. You don't want everyone just to be an amazing player, and Tanya was just like a hurricane that whirled through the camp, having arguments, blowing up, super obvious strategizing with everybody, and yeah, I don't know how she'll do a second time. I honestly can't see her doing well. But like, if in a season like All Stars, you want someone that you can bring along who, especially someone who went pre-merge, who will want to make their second time a better experience or a longer experience, I think should be someone that just wants to be a part of a group. And some of the bigger players might pick Tanya up and like bring her in, and if they can make her feel safe and she's not too crazy, maybe she's someone that just floats her way through with an alliance. But I could also very easily see her getting blasted out the airlock very quickly, because she did seem to annoy people a lot. So if she does that again, she might be out of there. But maybe she's worked on her social game. Dante. Oh. Dante was a rough player the first time that I didn't particularly enjoy for the majority of his time, but the one thing I really did like and respect about Dante was the crazy cult-like behavior that was going on Island of Secrets with Rob and his amigos and his spitshake people and all his many alliances that just had no perception of what was going on out there for some reason. Dante was the one that was really trying to push the minority into making something happen and getting nowhere with it, but at least he was trying. He was very aggressive in the way he spoke a lot of times, and not particularly good socially, which probably was why he never really got anything off the ground and was the only vote for players on several tribal councils. But he at least had the sense of what was going on, which is more than I can say for some of the cast members of that season. So I think it'd be interesting a second time, especially when Meryl is also on the season. So Meryl was like the calm to Dante's fire, and I think Meryl was someone who was a much better player than how it all went out because she was tied with Dante. I think by being tied with Dante, she got dragged down in the pecking order way quicker than she would have. And I think if I was Meryl in this season, if Dante is willing to work with me, great, but I ain't putting a lot of stock in that relationship. And I think the best thing Meryl can do is distance herself from Dante, because that's what went wrong the first time, and make new bonds and not be stuck with him, because he is very easy. He can very easily blow up relationships that you make if you are locked in with him as an ally. So I think that's an interesting relationship that could develop on this season. And then Steffi, who was, Lara Croft of the season, the powerhouse of the Amigos. Well, actually, Rob was kind of the powerhouse of the Amigos, but definitely a big physical player, and also someone who was very emotional throughout the season. I didn't enjoy a lot of. I've discussed it lots of times, but the biggest thing that grates me on Survivor is when people take things very personally rather than, understanding that it's a game. And I know it's easy to say that when you're sat in a warm room and not starving on an island, but there were several times Steffi annoyed me in that regard. As a second-time player, I think, Steffi is part of the most dominant alliance in Survivor South African history. And, Rob's not there. Nicole's not there. Would Nathan be back? Do I know all the people from this season? Nathan should be on this season, because he got screwed, man. Put Nathan on. Put Nathan on instead of Dante. Screw that, put Nathan on instead of Felix. Damn. Yeah. So, yeah, I suddenly just remembered Nathan. The people I really wish were on this season that aren't are Jacques, CP, and Nathan. I think there would have been 3 names that should have come back if there was more space. And yeah, take Felix out, take Dante out, and put 2 of them in. But I'm interested to see how these Island of Secrets players play in a more fluid season. They played in the season that was completely dominated by a small group. So hopefully they have more space to move in this season. And then this is the interesting one, because I only know that Dino comes back and obviously wins, and I know that Chappies is back. Unfortunately, I know Chappies doesn't do well, which is a shame. Chappies is someone who's like the big personality player of Survivor South Africa. He's someone who leaned too heavily on the physical game for me. So maybe that's why he doesn't do well. He's seen as too much of a physical threat straight away, and is just taken out because of that. But I'm very glad to see him come back, even if it is just for a short time, because his personality is worth being on TV, and it's a shame that it doesn't go better for him, but it is what it is. And Dino, obviously, we know wins the season, and Dino was someone who I knew won his second season before I watched his first season, so I didn't really feel too bad seeing him get voted out pre-jury and for his first season, because I know it all works out well for him. But I'm excited to see his winning game, because his game was quite sloppy in his first season. He made some mistakes, and I'm always interested in seeing the players who really change up their game. And knowing that Dino wins and knowing how he played in his first season, I think Dino's someone that will have had to have changed his game in order to get the win that he gets. So I'm really curious as to how Dino's game plays out and how he manages that. So that means there must be more people from this season that are playing. There's been 5 from the last 2, so I'm just going to put another 3 in. If I had to add people from this season, there are 2 people from this season that to me are absolute locks. They're two of my favourite players from Survivor South Africa, and honestly, like two of my favourite players in Survivor globally. I think they're both fantastic. Kieran was just so much fun in this season. He started out quite, I wouldn't say robotic, but like the Gamebot kind of thing. He was in control. He knew what he was doing, but he didn't show his personality much. And then as the season went on, and as people were leaving, so it's a smaller cast, it's easier to stand out. He really came out and was also a really funny player and a really likable guy. And as I said on the podcast, the person I was rooting for. And I think Kieran would be a great second-time player. And I think playing with all returning players, Kieran is someone that would be able to make relationships and find himself in the numbers. Did Kieran ever play with Dino? He started out on Vuna, and then he went to Vuna. Where was Dino? Zamba, and then he went to Vuna. So yes, he must have. Okay, so he might have a relationship. That must mean he was in the Dino Blindside. My memory is shocking. I literally just watched the season. I can't remember the details of it. And then obviously he has a relationship with Chappies. Knowing that Chappies goes early, if Kieran is there, would Kieran be on the same tribe as Chappies? I feel like Kieran has to be. I feel like if there's multiple players from this season, the two that I'm going to talk about here have to be on it. Because apart from Chappies, and above Dino, who was a pre-merge boot, I feel like Kieran would be an absolute lock. And my second player from that season, obviously, is Anesu, who was such a fantastic... she was on Vuna the entire time. Didn't realise that. Was a fantastic social and strategic player, and just such a likable person. And she was like the information hub of the season. So was Kieran. They were both like opposites, and that's what made that Kieran versus Anesu episode so good, because it was, the two best players of the season, in my opinion, going head to head. So I think Anesu should be an absolute lock for this season. And I think it kind of like, who were we discussing? Kind of like Palessa. I feel like Anesu would be someone who could level that returning player threat level by just being very social and making connections. Anesu was someone who was social with everybody, and literally everyone was feeding her information, and every single person wanted to work with her. She had such a lock on the game, and it took a huge move from a fantastic player like Kieran to flip things on her. So yeah, I think Anesu would have a fantastic second game, and I couldn't see Anesu going before merge. Not at all. Who else would I put in from this season? I think Santoni would be like a fun wild card. Is there anyone else? I mean, I'm guessing no winners. Like, I'd love to see Nicole play again. Obviously, I love her. And yeah, I think of that, Santoni is the only other one where I'd be like, yeah, give her a second run around. And if she's out there with... Ooh, that would be interesting if she was on the same tribe as Chappies again. Especially if I know Chappies goes early, because they were kind of one of the power couple dynamics on that season. So, yeah, I'd put Santoni in there. So that would give me like 15. And then there's like 3 from the previous era. I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe there's less. Or maybe it's a bigger season. Actually, I think it's a bigger season because it's more episodes. It might be like a 24 episode player season. Anyway, I'm just talking to myself. So yeah, that's my thoughts going into Return of the Outcasts. I love All-Star seasons and seeing how previous dynamics work out in a second season and new relationships that are going to form. So yeah, I'm really excited to see how it all plays out, and even going in on spoiled on the winner, there's still so much about the season that you don't know, and I'm excited to see how it all goes. And yeah, so I thought that would just be a fun little thing to have my discussion of Return of the Outcasts before I watch the season, and then we will get to the deep dive discussion of the season to round out Survivor South Africa next. Bye.